Seches Bava Kamma Daf Chaf Beis begins the sugya of Eish, that of a fire. What is the mazik of a fire, and what is the lomdus of how it is mechayev one, and the halachas to play out because of that. We'll have a machlokes amiroim, and we'll try to fit in the various mishnayos into that machlokes. Let's begin right away. The Gemara has machlokes in Reish Lakish. Why is a person chayev for a fire that he creates, which goes and burns? According to Rabbi Yochanan, it is considered to be his own force, his own energy. He creates the fire, and it travels through force, through being blown by the wind, to somewhere else. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan calls his chetz. It's like his arrow. It's like a person shot an arrow. The arrow goes and flies somewhere else and causes damage over there. The fire is blown by the wind somewhere else and causes damage over there. It's the person who is being mechayev for him creating the fire. Rish Lakish says differently. Rish Lakish says the fire itself is considered to be his property, and he's not properly caring for it. He's not properly watching it to make sure that it doesn't cause damage. It gets out of control, it causes damage, just like a shore, which gets out of control and causes damage. Now, why did they each take their perspective? So Rav Yochanan says you can't call it a shore because it has no substantiality to it. It's not matter, it's just energy. You can't own it, it's not property. And therefore it has to be just energy, it has to be a chetz, like a flying arrow. Rish Lakish says you can't view it as a flying arrow because it doesn't use the energy of the person. It travels on its own, it travels through the wind blowing it. And therefore it's not like a arrow which is shot from the person who fired it. Now, the Gemara begins by bringing proofs from the Mishnahs that we've seen. So the Gemara quotes the Mishnah we saw before about a dog who takes a cookie with a coal on it and puts it on a pile of grain and sets it on fire. So the halacha over there is that he pays nezek shalim for the cookie and chatzi nezek for the rest of it. So the Gemara wants to know why and how is it chatzi nezek and how does this make sense? So the Gemara says Rish Lakish will explain it in one way and Rabbi Yochanan will explain it another way. And the key we all have to figure out is how are we going to make the grain be only chatzi nezek? Through what havana of chatzi nezek is it? So Rish Lakish says on the cookie itself you pay nezek shalim. It's Shane, he ate it, nezek shalim for that. On the place where on the majority of the grain that the fire spread to on its own, that's not the fire of the person who owned the dog. It's the fire of the person who owned the coals. And therefore, you're not responsible for that. The dog and the owner of the dog is not responsible for that at all. So there's no chiyuv on that. You have to say that. Rish Lakish has to say that because he says that fire is because of property, but it's not your property. You can't be chayiv for it. So what's the chatzi nezek? The chatzi nezek has to be on the place where the coal hit immediately, not where it's spread. Where the dog put the coal. The dog is the mazik there. It's not the fire that's the mazik, it's the dog that immediately burned that spot. Now the question is so that's the only thing that's left to be chatzi nezek. So why is it chatzi nezek then if it didn't spread through the fire? The dog burned it, it should be nezek shalim. On that, my answer is that the dog didn't place it on the gadish, he threw it or he dropped it, and that's why it's tzreres, it's half nezek because it flew to there, and it's tzreres, it's small rocks. Now, the Gemara says that's Rish Lakish pshat. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you won't have to learn it that way. Rabbi Yochanan will say on the cookie itself, it's nezek shalim, of course, and on the entire area of the gadish, the entire area of the grain pile will all be chatzi nezek. And the reason is because it's all considered to be a fired arrow, and that's all tzreres, and therefore it's all chatzi nezek, and it doesn't matter that it's not your property, because if you shoot someone else's arrow, you're just as responsible. Possession has nothing to do with this mechayev. The Gemara now brings a second ayah from a Mishnah that discusses a camel loaded with very flammable flax, and what happens if his flax catches fire and then sets fire to a building. So the Mishnah has two cases. The first case is where the camel, which is overloaded with a huge amount of flax, is passing through the Rishus Harabim, and his flax sticks into someone's store, catches fire from a candle that he has there, and sets the entire building on fire. So the halacha there in this reisha is that the owner of the camel is chayiv. It's his fault for overloading the camel. He's responsible for the entire chain of events. If, however, the person who who owned the fire didn't take care of his fire. His flame had been outside, unless it's Hanukkah Neros, which has a right to be outside. But if it's not Hanukkah Neros and it's outside, it was not a properly cared for fire. And then the camel comes by with his overloaded flax, it catches fire and sets fire to the building. That is the fault of the person who put the candle there. That's improper care for an open flame. It's not the fault of the person who owns the camel. So the Gemara's kasha is on Rish Lakish if fire is because of Mammon. So how could you say that the owner of the camel is chayiv in the first case, in the Reisha, where the flax entered or brushed into the property in which it caught fire? It doesn't belong to the owner of the camel. The fire is not his. So how could it be chayiv for it if the one is chayiv for Eish because of property? It's not his Mammon, he can't be chayiv for it. So the Gemara answers is because what happened is the camel, after he lit his flax on fire, rubbed it all along the side of the building, so he burned it almost like with his hands, not because of his property. The camel himself went and burned the building. Someone says, if that's true, so then look at the Seifa. The Seifa says that if the candle wasn't properly watched, then it's the responsibility of the person who owns the candle, the store owner. But if the camel went and he smeared it all over the building, so then it should be his problem. It's not the store owner's problem. Why didn't the owner of the camel move him along? So the Gemara says he couldn't move him along. He stood still and he refused to move. And his flax was so big that it spread the fire across the entire wall of the building. So the Gemara says, well, then certainly he should have moved him. Why can't you move your camel? So the Gemara says the camel had to relieve itself and therefore it was impossible to move. The responsibilities there are, in the first case, because it was the owner of the camel that overloaded it. It's his problem and therefore he has to pay for it. And in the second case, the person put his fire outside and he behaved improperly, therefore he's responsible for the fire which was spread by the camel. The owner couldn't do anything to change the outcome. The Gemara now brings us to third raya, and this is another Mishnah where someone sets fire to a mountain of grain, a gadish, and again we have two cases, Reish and Seifa. The first case is that there was a goat tied to the gadish, and there was an eved near the gadish. They both got burned with the fire. So here the halacha is that the eved should have run away. It's his own problem for not running away. The person who lit the fire is not responsible for his death. And therefore, he is responsible for the gedi. There's no kamli ramne. He's responsible for the gedi. He has to pay for the gadish. He has to pay for the gedi. The second case, the seifa, that's where the eved was tied to the gadish and he couldn't escape. And therefore, by setting fire to the gadish, the person who lit it effectively murdered the eved. He's chayav misa for that. Someone who gets misa doesn't have to pay for a hezek that he causes along the way. Because of kamli b'ramine, you only get the larger punishment when there are two in the same action. And therefore, he's pater on the gadish and pater on the gidi because kamli b'ramine. Now, the Gemara asks, if you say that Eish is Misham Chetziyai, so then I understand why he's pater, because he himself, the person who lit the fire, is the one who is responsible for causing the death of the Eved in the Seifa, and therefore this kamli b'ramine. However, if it's Misham B'mainai, so it's like his ox went and killed the Eved. He lit a fire, the fire went and killed the Eved. At the same time, he killed a Gidi. Why shouldn't you be chayiv for both of them? If a ox kills an Eved and a Gidi, you're not chayiv for the goat? For sure you are. There's no kamli b'ramine on an ox. You're chayiv for both of them. So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, who holds that way, he would say we're not referring to where the fire spread. We're referring to where he put the fire directly on the Eved. So he literally murdered the Eved. It's not working as the fire that killed him as his memainai, as his shar. He himself physically caused the death of the Eved. So Gemara says if he did that, what's the chiddush? Of course he did. There's no chiddush in the fact that there's kamli b'ramine that he's pater on the other things. That's straightforward. So Gemara says the chiddush is that the gedi doesn't belong to the same person who owns the Eved. And therefore you may say, why should the person who owns the gedi lose his payment? He didn't get anything out of the Eved. He didn't get anything out of the loss of the Eved. He gets no compensation at all in this case. So the person who owns the gedi, therefore maybe you would say, there's no kamli b'ramine to make him lose. The chiddush is no, he loses his payment anyway because kamli b'ramine doesn't care where the money's going to go. The person who's obligated only has to pay once. The Gemara now brings its fourth raya, and this is from a Mishnah that discusses somebody who sends a fire in the property of a cheresh, shaita, or a katan. They're not fully responsible for their actions. So the halach over there is the putter in dine adam. A person can't be mechayev you for giving a fire to a cheresh, shaita, or a katan. However, b'dine shemayim, you were responsible, and therefore you're going to be chayev. Someone wants to know, why are you putter b'dine adam? Someone says, if you say that eish is mishum chetziyai, that it's the power of the person who sends it, so this is the power of the cheresh and the shait and the katan. You didn't do anything; he shot the arrow, and therefore you can't be responsible for what he did. You didn't make him shoot the arrow; it was something that he did on his own. Now, so then I would understand why you're pater b'dinei adam. However, if you say it's mishum mimaynai, so it's his property. If you take your shar and you give it to a cheresh shait v'katan, which is not a proper way of caring for it, then you're obligated for whatever happens to it. So here also you give a fire, which is your property, to a cheresh shait v'katan, and a disaster happens, so it's your problem. It's your fire that was mazik. So Sakashan Rish Lakish holds that it's mishum mimaynei. So Rish Lakish answers in the name of Chizkiah, we're not talking about where you gave him a fire. We're talking about where you gave him a coal, and nothing would have happened. Your property was perfectly watched. The cheresh went ahead and blew on it and cultivated a flame out of it, and that's where the problem started. So that's his possession. He created that fire. What you gave him wasn't a fire. Now, if, however, you would have given him a flame, then you would actually be chayev because it was your property, and the hezek is likely to happen. Then Rabbi Yechanan says that even in case where you give him the flame, you still pater because it is the work, the holding, the actions of the cheresh that caused the fire, and therefore it's mishum chetziyah, it's his chetziyah, and it's not your chetziyah, so you're pater for that. The only situation which you would be chayav according to Rabbi Yechanan is if you gave him literally everything. You gave him a candle, you gave him kindling, and you gave him branches, you gave him the whole 9 yards to make a fire. And of course, if you did that, you're responsible for what happens afterwards. Now, Rava says there's a pasuk and a brisa that support of Yechanan that eish is mishum chetziyah, that it's an arrow. There's the pasuk that says kiseitzi eish, that the fire goes out. It means that it's teitzei me'atzma, that it travels on its own. So then Yeshayim Hamavers Habe'era, then you have to pay the one who sent it, and that's Mishum Chetziyai. The Brisa says that you started in our Mishnah with the halachos of Nizkei Momen, we talked about Shar and Nabar. We ended off with Nizkei Gufay, possibly Mava, and Eish, to say that Eish is Mishum Chetziyai, that it's a Nizkei Gufay, it's something which you do with your body. It's like you fired the arrow, you sent the fire, and you're chayav for that.